Good afternoon, colleagues. This is Rob Ward from the CRA. Hope you can hear me okay. And if you can't and you want to, that you'll let me know. I'm just going to do a 2-minute introduction, and then I'm going to hand over to Matthew, to Matt, and to Jimmy, who are in a more scenic part of the world. If you saw their earlier slide, you'll know what I mean. So welcome to everyone to this CRA hosted webinar. We are a select group, but a growing group, and also I know that a number of people have indicated that they want to listen to the recording, including those people who are coming to Dublin next month to our ePortfolio seminar, where the presentation of a wider range of credentials digitally related to academic achievement, but also students and others' wider achievements in a digital form will be a key element. Delighted to welcome Matt and his colleague Jimmy, and to reprise really, this is a theme of good interest, strong interest, certainly in the UK context, and some of the things we've noted are as important in that kind of context around really our digital record, the Higher Education Achievement Report. We've got a lot of evidence that HEARs are being developed in quantity, issued in quantity, but employer interest is not systematic as yet. And so we want to do something about that. And we want to recognise too the LinkedIn claim that students can add digital badges and digital records to their LinkedIn profiles, and there's a lot of interest in that in the UK. We want to recognise that an awful lot of employers, certainly this side of the pond, and I guess for yourselves too in the US, use social media to recruit, so there's a digital context there. And we want to encourage student engagement and employer engagement in this whole enterprise as we go forward. So with that said, I'm delighted that Matt and Jimmy are going to offer us this overview and the evidence of their approach to the sharing of digital records. And we've got about 55 minutes now. What I suggest we do, because not everybody, and I've just got a note from a colleague saying she's unable to speak, but she's listening in. And I just want to draw everybody's attention to the chat box, where you can write to all of us if you keep with everyone. Then what will happen is we'll collect those as we go along. Matt and Jimmy can see those. We can either invite you to respond as we go along, colleagues, or we can take a few minutes at the end just to pick up some of the key themes before we finish up. This session is being recorded, and so you'll be able to access it later. We'll make it available, and people can get the chat and also the recording. I hope that people will keep their mics off if you've got mics, because our experience has been in previous webinars, they can be incredibly disruptive to hear all the comments in the background, particularly open plan offices. I'll keep an eye on the chat. I'm sure we'll get a lot of stuff transacted in the next 55 minutes or so. And with that, I'm able to mute my microphone and hand over to Matt and to Jimmy, who are going to take us through the parchment perspective, I guess, particularly, but on that theme of linking digital records into LinkedIn profiles. So I'll shut up and over to you, colleagues. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having us. And we've been looking forward to this conversation, and I really do hope it's a conversation. So please do use the chat as I go through the presentation, as does Jimmy, and we'll be able to return to those comments and questions at the end. And this is actually one of 2 webinars, which we're excited to do. The second webinar is actually going to touch very directly on that question of employers. We've done a lot of work understanding which employers in the US context have a policy or a practice of collecting and evaluating academic transcripts as part of their hiring process, and what role do transcripts in particular play in helping learners realize employment opportunities. What are the industries? How is that trending? And what is the feedback that employers provide? And that's going to connect into one of our partners, Elon University, and the work they've done, which is very similar in spirit to the HEAR, but with a very different look and feel and format to create a more comprehensive learner record to meet the needs of those employer audiences. For this particular webinar, so that's a promo for the future webinar. For this particular webinar, we're gonna really focus in on a more specific question, which is the role of social platforms as a display environment for academic records by students. Again, in particular in the employment context, but as Jimmy will talk about, when you really survey students and go a little bit deeper into why they want to share and what the role of the credential plays, employment, while an important part of it, is not the only part of it. So as you can see, our agenda, I'll start with a very quick Parchment introduction. We are probably a new name to many who are part of the webinar, focusing primarily in the US context, although I do see some familiar faces on the attendee list from the Groningen meeting, so hello. And then I'll hand it over to Jimmy to talk about survey data on the attitudes of students, on the role that they see their records playing in their social lives. Jimmy will go a little bit deeper into actual data on sharing through LinkedIn and other social platforms and how that's gone and what the experience is and what the feedback is, how students have actually shared, and then I'll come back and talk a little bit about some insights we have in our collaboration and discussions with LinkedIn, although that's always a little bit of a dangerous thing since we don't work for the organization and they obviously can speak well for themselves. I'm also going to try to keep an eye on the chat, and I see some back and forth on the audio. So let me just stop here and make sure. Can I be heard well?
Fine for me, Matt. This is Rob.
Okay, so I'll take any comments then as perhaps an individual attendee's configuration. So starting with the introduction, Parchment exists for one very simple purpose, which is to help learners turn their credentials into opportunities. Now, we can't do that because we are not a credentialing organization. So we partner with secondary schools and universities to help accomplish that. My background, I worked for many years in the learning management system market. I was one of the early co-founders of Blackboard. And there the idea was to help partner with universities to innovate the teaching and learning process. And obviously an LMS is only as innovative as the instructor and how they use it. But I think good work has been done in that area. But at the end of the day, when a student graduates, it's really the credential that is the currency with which they will turn that education into opportunity, whether that is in the context of admissions, undergraduate admissions, graduate admissions, and transfer, whether it's the bridge of education into employment for the first time, professional certification and licensing and beyond. Credentials really interact with our opportunity to access opportunities throughout our life course, and they play a lot of different roles in that context. I think this is probably an audience that knows this better than I do, but the traditional credential has many limitations. First off, they are paper-based, they're analog, and so the data are trapped. The credential is typically fairly opaque in its information. On a diploma, using the US terminology, all you have is name, rank, and serial number, so to speak, less than a prisoner of war can share in the Geneva Convention. On an academic transcript, you have courses and credits and grades, but that doesn't add too much. And the educational experience a typical student goes through is obviously much richer and much more comprehensive. A credential is generic, it's one size fits all, and yet there are very distinct audiences from using a credential on a social platform where privacy and other concerns would dictate a certain set of data, to using it in admissions context with other educational organizations where a deeper academic record is relevant, to using it for employers. But we even have, for example, University of Indiana is working on the personalization where you can actually customize the record by audience. So if you're sending your academic transcript to Accenture versus Google, you might highlight different courses in that context. And then last but not least, credentials and credentialing is very fragmented. In the US context, a typical college student will attend more than one institution on their way to a degree, not to mention the secondary school and as well as post-secondary, when you move into taking MOOC courses and learn in other contexts, the ability to collect and manage those credentials in one place is important. So we know the roadmap to address these challenges. It's to move credentials to digital and to data. It's to create a more comprehensive learner record, to create a record that's more contextualized or can be contextualized, as well as really putting the learner at the center of it, where they own and control and can collect and manage their records. And I must say, from the outside, the HERE has been a very significant inspiration to our work and to the work of ACRO and the Comprehensive Learner Record Initiative, which we'll talk about at the next webinar. So I imagine when you're on the inside, you're always perhaps frustrated and want more adoption, more uses, and you're working on solving problems that have emerged from the initial implementations. But when you're on the outside, particularly in the very decentralized context of the US, the vision of a more comprehensive learner record, as well as the coordination to do that in a relatively standardized way, and to see a record as really about accessing opportunity and to be owned and empowered the learner, those are very inspirational things, and we really are following in your footsteps at this stage. The last piece about us, very, very briefly, I don't want this to be an advertisement, but you may interact with us, and so it may be helpful to just have a quick sense of our context. We're one of 3 major services in the US that high schools and colleges rely on to be able to take electronic requests and fulfill electronically, as well as print, academic transcripts, diplomas, other types of credentials. And we deliver not only in the US, but globally. So you likely receive transcripts through Parchment from any one of the institutions that we work with. About 1 in 4 secondary school students in the US, about 1 in 5 college students in the US attend high schools or colleges that use Parchment. And so we would be the service that they would rely on to make their credentials available electronically, including students who are studying from abroad at those institutions and then need to send them back. And then we work with almost every admissions office of any scale in the US to receive and collect electronically as well. On the issuing side, the basic idea of the platform is to really create as comprehensive a data model as possible, as comprehensive a learner record, develop a series of templates that represent the different types of records that an institution may generate, from a diploma, which is really a very limited set of that data in a very ceremonial format, to an academic transcript, which focuses on courses and grades, to something like the visual experiential transcript that Elon has done, which creates a very different look and feel and focuses more on the co-curricular. You can have any number badging, any number of record types, and then light up a set of functionality for them to be ordered, and if there's fees collected, issued out, printed and mailed, emailed, social display, as we'll talk about, the download of the Blue Ribbon PDF, as well as the collection from receivers are the kinds of functionality. And then we also have a receiving service, and this is what a lot of our engagement with the Groningen Network and our early engagement in the UK and in other contexts is focused on, is the ability to more efficiently collect and manage electronic credentials from the US, as well as from other organizations. So you can collect through Receive from CHESIC out of China, from BridgeU, the college and career readiness solution that's in the UK and elsewhere, as well as our network, as well as open standards networks as well, to be able to collect that and manage that all in one unified inbox as a receiver, and then route it into the relevant information system that you work with. So that really, I think, sets the context for us. Because of a little bit of, Jimmy and I are in the same room, we don't want feedback. I'm gonna hand my mic over to him quite literally. So you'll see it's my name that's still presenting, but it will be Jimmy who is speaking. So give us one moment to do that.
Perfect. Can you guys hear me okay? You can just leave a message in the chat. I can make sure you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you, Jimmy, thanks. And it's Rob. I'm just excited by the notion of we're transmitting to the world using the internet and we're having to share microphones. It's great.
Isn't that great? I gotta love the technology these days, right? All right, well, I'll go ahead and kick in then, and really just wanted to talk more a little bit about kind of our survey data and the research we've done here to understand, the motivations behind students sharing, as well as the experience that we built based upon that, and then some of the actual results that we've seen after our first year, going into our second year now of issuing more of these digital awards. So just to start off, we did survey students in 2016. It was a little over 1,000 students, and really just to try and understand, what were their motivations, what were they planning to do. Most of them were upcoming graduates when they graduated with their diploma or other credential or record that they were going to earn. And unsurprisingly, the first usage that they kind of called out was the ability to communicate with employers. I like to look at the stat on the bottom, which is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that shows that on average, a millennial will hold in their lifetime well over 15 plus jobs. So not only are the ability to communicate once they graduate, but we're seeing more millennials having to change roles, change companies, and during that transition, the capability to communicate that record to that new organization so they can verify it is one area that we found important to address. The other side was the communication with institutions. So once someone graduates, we did find that 28% of them might further their education, with 47% planning to further that education. In addition, jobs these days, at least in the US, are it's more your credentials that you use for that are higher. So what used to be a bachelor's degree, you now need a master's to attain. And so the need to go back to school to fill this credential gap is also another area that we saw as a whole to address that sharing between the institution and the student, whether they're furthering their education or if they're going back to school to earn new records to get a promotion inside their current role. And so at the bottom, there's a link, so we'll be able to share out the infographic with all the statistics for everybody at the end. So then once we understand where they wanted to share to, we also want to understand, okay, well, what else would you like that credential or that record to do for you? What other functionality or features were desirable? And the top one, I'm gonna go ahead and dive into shareable and into the holistic and competency-based a little bit further. But to talk about immediate and faster, the no more waiting for printing and mailing, putting that record to use right away was the motivation behind that. Getting that instantaneously, being able to secure that for the promotion or for that job was a high feature that they are desiring or wanted to have. Clickable, that's a growing trend in the US where links are embedded inside of records. It gives more details, more context. It could be a course description about what that student actually learned. Transferability, so moving from oneself to wherever they need to go easily, and mobile, kind of speaking to the portability and capable of being used in the format they need when they need it, which leaves these two here for us to talk about, which are the shareable and the holistic and competency-based. So from a competency-based area, we asked them, what would you like included inside the record? What could be signs of more of the different things that you've done that speak to why you would be a better hire, maybe compared to somebody else? And so what they did find desirable or useful inside that record would be academic performance, including descriptions of the classes they've taken, internships that they were a part of during school, if they studied abroad, all of these different extracurricular projects, just more information that they're looking to include on that record, so it gives a better holistic picture of who they are. We thought it was really interesting the breakdown of how it came in, with academic performance still being a key driver, but internships and class projects being up there at the top as well. We thought were newer observations that we've seen. And then from the sharing standpoint, students want to share their records on social media. They don't just want to share them with the employers, with institutions as they're moving from one to another, which is that functionality is very important. But if we focus on just the functionality, we do miss out on a major motivation behind that student sharing. And some other key stats to talk about here before I jump to the next slide is, 60% of upcoming graduates or 58% of students were planning to share their degree on social media, with Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter being the top three that they said they were going to share it on. We are going to talk about where they actually shared it a little bit later, which I think is interesting because there is a discrepancy in what they said versus what actually happened. But then looking at those numbers, we wanted to dive into the motivations behind it. Do you want me to take this question before I jump to the next one?
No, why don't you go through
Okay, no problem. So then the motivations behind actually sharing and why we believe Facebook was higher up there was that pride is the leading reason students wanted to share on social media. At least that's what they expressed. Pride in themselves, pride in their accomplishment, proud to be a good example of their family, which is all very important motivations to understand. More and more Facebook is being used as a way for family to keep in contact with another, making it an ideal social profile for students to share on based on the motivation that they expressed. It also, I think, is very important to call out here that a lot of times we are looking for behavior that our students or our learners already are naturally taking. A student is motivated to share on social media. That's an opportunity for your organization, your brand to be forefront when that person is sharing that record out. That gives them the capability to then click into the record and learn more about you. So if we can figure out the motivations, understand a behavior of our students and learners, we wanted to try and figure out what functionality we can add to that experience to remove barriers to then allow you to share with that student in that moment that great next step, that great milestone that they just accomplished. So based on that information, we now kind of understood, all right, so this is what students are looking for. This is what they say they want, which doesn't always meet what actual expectations are. And so we went out and built a platform to help out with the issuing of records, the claiming of the records by the student, the sharing capabilities, and also the tracking capabilities from the administrator's perspective. And so we'll take a look at that experience quickly. I have a couple of videos here so you can watch, and I'll talk through it as they go through. And so on this video right here, what you're going to see is this is when a student has already claimed the record. So an email's gone out, the record has been claimed, and now the student is logging in and going into their dashboard where that record is going to live in the future. And so I'll click right here and you can start to watch. Once they get in here, this modal will pop up. We call it a sharing experience or wizard. They can easily share to Facebook. They could go next and share on LinkedIn instead. On LinkedIn, they can write a post, which will go straight into their feed, their feed that is shown to all of their followers. And then we also can download a PDF. The PDF copy is going to have a Blue Ribbon certification, so it's verified by an employer. And then the last part of it is the capability for them to come back to this dashboard or their credential profile is what we call it, to either reorder in the future. They can share it either by clicking on these tiles or they can download it as well. So that's the claiming experience and the sharing experience there. Then once that question then kind of brings in, all right, well, now that we're sharing, our students actually sharing, and what does it look like? And so for LinkedIn, I took a screen capture of the actual diplomas being shared on LinkedIn. As you notice, as it scrolls down, you'll see the likes, the comments. These are organic, comments that are coming in from this person's network. That credential or that diploma that you're seeing is clickable. They could click into it. They could learn more about it. They could see where it came from. Here's an example of someone that's not using a digital diploma, and just the difference in how much better it looks, how much more brand genuity there is there, and how much more exposure you would have. And then lastly, the clicking into the actual credential, you can see what it looks like. It is certified at the top, and gives you more information if you were looking to get more information on it. And then lastly is the experience that the administrator sees. So once you issue the diploma out or credential or record out, you can see how many were issued, how many were actually claimed, the share rates. So, if they are being shared, where they're being shared, you could hover over and understand where these records are actually being shared as well. So it gives a holistic understanding for the administrator to see, okay, where with the credentials I'm issuing, where are they being claimed and where are they being shared? You could find cohorts inside of that to understand engagement and alumni for us. So you can see the spring class commencement is much more engaged versus the fall. It could help you with outreach if you're looking for alumni relations support as well. All right, so now we've seen what it looks like. We've seen how it kind of works. The last part is talking about how students actually shared. And so we are in our second year of issuing more digital records and diplomas. We did recently survey the recipients of these digital diplomas from last year. And these are the findings from that survey, as well as some of the data that we have from the actual event. So After our first year, we did find that 71% of students gave the digital diploma experience 9 out of 10. While we would like to think that we built the best experience possible, we do also have to give some credit to the previous survey. We did have some help going into that and understanding the motivations behind what the students wanted, so it helped us out. We also have the advantage of just modern times and technology. No more waiting for paper. The student does expect to be able to claim that diploma digitally and share it with their friends. It's part of their everyday, this modern life that we live nowadays. So that also helped with this good ranking. And also for the first time, we were able to kind of remove all of these barriers and make this experience possible for the student. The second part that we asked them was, well, now that we know you enjoyed it, what were the top 3 reasons that you enjoyed this experience? And so speed, simplicity, ease, all natural things that you would expect to hear, just further helping to back up the idea that the digital experience is something that is coming to the US, is starting to complement more and more the paper diplomas that we've been seeing. And really the speed, simplicity, and ease as being the top features that they've enjoyed. But I think it's also important, or we do think it's also important to talk about what a digital record is. Digital records should go beyond just offering a PDF version. They should also offer social sharing, secure verified sharing overseas, if applicable, and also constant availability. So that's the main features that we would also recommend to make sure are in a PDF, are in your digital offering. It's not just having a PDF, it's about making sure that students can interact with it. In fact, so many students enjoyed sharing it that 33% shared their diplomas online, with 62% downloading a copy for future use with either employers or with the family. And so with that, we also wanted to take a look back at, okay, so where were these individuals sharing? We had asked them earlier on about where they intended to share on social media, and unsurprisingly, we did see that Facebook led the way with 70%. LinkedIn came in second. I think I rounded up, it should have been 29%. And then Twitter with the 1% there. So if you look at how that compares to what they said, we do see a little bit of discrepancy where LinkedIn was used more than they anticipated it to be used, and Facebook maybe even used a little bit less. And so we find that very interesting. We do find it important to continue to build out the sharing capability on LinkedIn as well as Facebook, understanding the motivations behind why they're sharing, especially on Facebook, because of the pride aspects of it. We find it to be very important. And then also the LinkedIn side of it, which Matthew will talk about more in a second, the ability to share it on the profile like LinkedIn, where they have a network of other professionals who would be potentially looking for to secure more records like the one that you're offering, gives you a way to more organically promote your program through their network without it being cheesy or paid or promotional in a way. And I can hand it over here to Matt. He can talk more about the observations of records in LinkedIn.
Great, thank you, Jimmy. So just transitioning from Jimmy's description, the piece that I really have learned the most in this process, which shouldn't be a surprise, but it is that qualitative or the effective side of credentials. We think of them as important records that can be used for employment purposes. Our mind immediately goes to LinkedIn as the most relevant platform, but just remembering that these are emotional accomplishments. I'm the first in my family to graduate. I've achieved a milestone. There's a tremendous amount of positive energy that can be harnessed in connecting the student to their credential and engaging around it in that context where Facebook is the primary platform. And then as they move into the employment cycle, they begin to shift their mindset towards LinkedIn and I guess to more quote unquote rational uses of the credential as well. And again, we're going to talk at the next webinar with the help of Rodney at Elon about the new kinds of record formats that are evolving that are more amenable to sharing. You don't want to share a traditional academic transcript, at least as it's formatted in the US. There's a lot of private information and it's all or nothing. So institutions are also beginning to think about how do you take the data that is in a record and create formats that are useful in a social context, distinct from useful when an employer is sitting down, more like a CV and meeting with a candidate, that's useful in the context of machine readable data to discover somebody, versus later in the funnel when you're trying to differentiate among a set of finalists. Those are all different use cases for a credential. But to close out and come back, I know, Rob, when we thought about this webinar, a lot of it was focused on LinkedIn in particular. Again, I don't want to claim any particular or special knowledge of LinkedIn and their strategy, but we have spent a little bit of time with them. So the first observation, again, is while our mind naturally goes to LinkedIn, would strongly encourage folks to focus on a variety of social platforms as being relevant for the different ways in which learners think about their credentials. And even in the professional context, while LinkedIn is the largest and probably market dominant, you have in the medical field Doximity, you have for odds and end jobs, different freelance websites. So you have other contexts where your credentials are relevant to representing yourself. The first thing that we heard from LinkedIn when we sat down and talked with them, so stepping back, as you likely know, not too long ago, probably about 8 or 9 months ago, LinkedIn end of life their key API. So there's a few contexts in which credentials can be displayed within LinkedIn. It can be within the news feed, and those are the examples that Jimmy showed. That has the upside of being immediate, of generating social energy and feedback. It has the downside that it will eventually leave the feed. And so it's temporally, I guess, limited. The second approach was to be able to publish it into your certification section. That was always very frustrating because an academic credential, when we talk about records, we're talking about typically diplomas. They most logically belong in the education section, but LinkedIn never opened up their API to the academic or education section. So you would be publishing an academic degree into what is otherwise typically used for professional certifications. And that always felt like a limited experience. We know we weren't the only ones giving that feedback to LinkedIn. Unfortunately, the response was to end of life it entirely, as opposed to opening it up to the education section. So that now leads to a third approach, which is what our wizard walks folks through, and which we've seen a good number of students do, taking the URL for the diploma and then using the portfolio capability of LinkedIn to display in line that diploma image within the academic section of the profile. You could also just create a link back that goes to a landing page for that record as well. So we continue to engage them. We are not the only one. The badging, I serve on the IMS Digital Badging Board. There's a lot of work there as well to just continue to evangelize the importance of being able to bring these records in. We can't explain the motivation, but I can say that while for us, verification is such a logical use case within LinkedIn, the ability to embed a link back to verify that education is true. We come out of the academic community, we value that verification. I've had more than one conversation with a LinkedIn product manager where that is not necessarily their as critical a capability for them. Certainly getting skills data in and always hungry for more data, but they really believe that the community is the source of the verification. That if someone misrepresents an element of their LinkedIn profile, the community is where and how that will ultimately be discovered and vetted. And there's even some concern about a unlevel playing field, where if you open up the opportunity for some individuals to provide a verified component of their profile, whether it's in their education section or in the employment section, that might then, by definition, cast a cloud on the rest of the profile. For rest of the individuals who don't do that for some reason, and it creates a little bit of a verification arms race or a verifications inflation or penalty if you don't do it, which I think is an understandable concern. I can imagine why they would want to be thoughtful about that. Yet at the same time, there's this strong desire when folks claim their education to be able to demonstrate that it's true and valid, as well as to be able to provide a link into a more robust version of that record to understand what it means in terms of the experiences, excuse me, and competencies that are behind it. So that wraps up kind of the presentation component. My email is easy. It's matthew@parchment.com. Jimmy's is a little trickier, but you can see it there. Please feel free to email either of us. We're happy to share the presentation as well. And we know it's recorded. And now we're excited to move into the discussion mode. And I'll hand it back to you, Rob, to help moderate that, if you will.
I'm happy to do that, Matt, and thank you both. Thank you in many languages. I won't attempt to go through them all, but that's great. We will make, if we haven't got the presentation, Matt, we'll make it available as part of the, alongside the recording, if you're happy for us to do that, to those who've attended, and also those who are coming to Dublin who I know couldn't make it today but want to be appraised of the kind of work you're doing before they touch down later this month. Is that okay?
Yes, that's welcome. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. I think, colleagues, if you'd like to jot your thoughts down as we go, we have one or two already to go at. And if people are able to join in the conversation, that's great. If you're able to put things in the chat, that's great too. There's a number of issues kind of come up. I know some people can't join the chat because they've said so, but if you can, you're very welcome too. Just in terms of where we've arrived at, I guess one of the interesting, there are a number of interesting things in what you're saying, but I guess one of the interesting things that goes beyond the PDF notion is the notion you spoke a little bit about, Matt, early on, which was about the kind of personalization and having being able to present aspects of the data for audience. And it might also relate to your sense of a social purpose and an employability purpose. And I don't want to make those discretely different, but to note that some platforms may be more tuned for people to share socially with family and friends and so on, and some, certainly in the UK context, employers seem to prowl the corridors of LinkedIn looking for candidates as a regular process. So do you want to say anything about that notion of views on the data? Because I think that is where we want to head in the UK, certainly.
Absolutely, and we're going to go a lot deeper into that in the second webinar and show some examples of it. But our belief and what we're beginning to see happen, and there is a downside to this, which I'll talk about in a moment. But our belief is that the one-size-fits-all academic transcript is giving way to a more diverse set of record formats that, as long as we're digital and as long as we're taking advantage of a comprehensive learner record from a data model perspective, it can still be quite efficient to create different formats of records for different audiences. So at the highest level, traditionally we've had an academic transcript, which provides a lot, and then we have a diploma, which provides very little. Even the academic transcript provides a lot, still doesn't capture any number of experiences. And we have an increasing interest, thanks to the work of ePortfolios, the data that are captured in learning management systems, increasingly the data that are being tracked around the co-curricular, leadership and activities, internship, study abroad. Some of those experiences are now increasingly in information systems, whether it's the SIS or a purpose-built system. We can now integrate that data together and have different record types. So you'll have an academic transcript, you may have a competency record, which is the same type of information, but flipped around from what you did to what you actually can do. The co-curricular or experiential learning, which focuses more on the co-curricular, these are in many ways sections of the here, but separated out into their own record. We also have not just columns and dry text, but as you'll see with Elon, the visual transcript, where instead of having an entry like internship, you actually see Ernst & Young, you actually see Accenture's logo. It may sound silly, but that really does make a difference. You can see where in the world someone is studied. You can see the percentage of volunteer time by organization type. So you can really reimagine what a record should look like based on who's receiving it. But that's really at a record type. Then you have where the record is going. So if I'm sending the same record to one type of organization, like an admissions office versus another kind of organization, an employer, or a particular type of employer, you can then begin to imagine more personalization, or I think the better term would be contextualization. Now, there's a healthy debate. In Indiana, the argument is, should you still provide the entire academic transcript and do it just as a cover sheet that shows different courses highlighted for Accenture versus Google, because you have concerns about selective disclosure? Whereas others would say, as long as what you're communicating is true and valid, and you make clear that this is a subset of the record, to create something that the student wants out of the official institution's data is a perfectly okay, indeed desirable way of thinking about records. Now, the concern is also the Tower of Babel problem. And that's where I think the here is very attractive, because you've thought about how can institutions begin to innovate their record in a way that still has a common data model, and where people can still recognize that you go to this section for that information and this other section for this other information. And if I'm an employer getting very different kinds of records from different institutions, you could see how that creates exception processes and then very quickly causes them to not deal with it at all. They'll go down to the most common denominator and we'll be no further ahead than we were before. So there's a lot of learning that still has to happen, but it's neat to see that innovation based on the different kinds of institutions. So hopefully that was responsive.
That's very helpful. I mean, in the UK context, very briefly, I think we'd be very understanding of what you're saying, and in fact, some of the employer feedback has been it's got to be the same from everywhere, but then employers themselves are not the same. So I guess those two elements, the record type, but the audience for the record, are key. And at the end of the day, we want our students to be able to configure their performance, their achievements, and their experiences for the audience they're engaging with. So that's why the social record might actually say some different things than a record which is made use of for an engagement with an employer or a higher qualification. So yeah, I recognize that altogether. Steve, do you want to, thank you, Matt. Steve, do you want to say anything about your question about Facebook?
It's just an obvious question, everybody, which is there, I mean, it's probably too early to say whether or not the recent controversy around Facebook has put some students off using it.
It's an excellent question, and it's something we're curious about as well. And you hit the nail on the head when you said that it's still a little bit early to tell, especially, you know, what we've really focused these data on are the diploma. So things like badging are a little bit more fluid throughout the academic year, but the diploma at the end of, the end of commencement, when you've earned the degree, you know, we haven't gotten to that point, although we're not too far away at this moment. I do think students are, what we have seen though, is students are savvy about what they're using, which platform they're using for their diploma. So it goes first on Facebook. It's just the diploma, and it's on the context of celebrating and sharing with their broader network. I don't see privacy concerns affecting that particular use case. But as you move towards the ability to, you know, which you can't do today, to be clear, but if you imagine a use case where you could populate a LinkedIn profile with additional data immediately out of your record, then you can imagine people being a little bit more thoughtful or sensitive. But that's not really the nature of their use on Facebook.
Thank you. I look forward to an answer later on when you've had time and the impact, if it's had any impact at all, is worked through.
That does raise a slightly different question before we get to Milo's point about the in the UK context, a lot of employers are interested in recruitment in the final year of a student's undergraduate program, i.e. before the qualification is awarded. And I know some of our organisations that are issuing HEARS digitally are thinking about and implementing strategies to make some of that data available prior to graduation. Is that a concern for yourselves? Because it's a difficult one, because the records are not formally signed off at that point, but the students are applying for positions in that final year. Does that make any sense in a US context? And do you have thoughts about how to deal with it?
It absolutely makes sense, and there's a category of software providers who work with the career office at the university. And at that point, I think because it's still formative data, I guess, is the best way to describe it. It's really working with the student information system. It's not really thought of in the context of a credential. It's just thought in the context of that broader data, but or that formative data, and then ePortfolios, other types of information can play into that. I think it does hit, though, the need to be thoughtful about the role of a credential across that life cycle. So you have the discovery of the candidate, which is a database searching type mechanism or a social platform searching mechanism, to now I'm trying to filter and differentiate. And that's an uncomfortable place, because we want to advance every student. We want to advantage every student. And yet part of what credentials are meant to do is discriminate and differentiate among students and filter. And so that's kind of interesting. And then when you get down to the short list that you're going to actually interview, when you see what Elon has built, it works particularly well in that context, not as well as the other two contexts. When you're sitting in front of a candidate, to have this simple 2-page visual record that helps summarize some of their experiences at the university, and also scaffolds the learner to be able to better communicate that, because they often are not they're often not very good advocates for themselves, and being able to translate what they've done in their university experience in ways an employer would care about.
Absolutely, we can identify that here too. Milo, I don't know whether you've got access to a mic. If not, I can just point to your question in the chat, which is around the platforms that didn't kind of survive the cut, as I read it. Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter kind of went on to the next stage in terms of what students actually did. What happened to Instagram and et al., I think, is the question. If I've got that wrong, Milo, let me know.
That's a great question. We, like anyone who develops software, you have to have a version 1. And so for us, version 1 just covers those 3 platforms. So the reason why you don't see beyond that, although we do have knowledge-based articles that just speaks to the power of the URL. So the URL that points back to the Parchment page with the display view of the diploma, and then also has the broader data model. If you want to link into other information, see the evidence of learning, that can be shared on any platform, but we wouldn't be able to track that in particular. So that's why you see those 3 systems. They're the ones that the wizard focuses on, as well as the downloading of the PDF.
Okay, so we're measuring kind of what we've set ourselves up to measure in that sense. Yeah.
Precisely right.
Okay, thanks. Steve, do you want to come back on the issue about
granularity?
Granularity and engagement with students, and whether there's a support industry developing which will help students make the most of themselves, and how that's working out. Thanks, Milo, for the confirmation. That's the right question.
Thanks, Rob. So it's a question in 2 bits, really. The first is, as digital records become more sophisticated with more granularity, whether students are having to spend more time preparing them, which leads to the second bit, which is there, do some students get support, help, training in how to prepare their digital records, in which case, as Rob said, there's a possibility of a record writing industry being formed in within the curriculum?
I don't think I could put it better myself, and I have deep concerns and ambivalence about this. If I make the analogy within the learning management system, when I sit on panels and talk about how the learning management category has evolved and how much rich data now are available and how that data is used for all sorts of purposes, I get deeply concerned as a faculty member. I also teach in the sociology department at Arizona State University. I want my classroom to be a formative environment. I want it to be a learning environment. I want it to be an environment of trial and error, of success and failure. And to think that in the context of that learning environment, that success and failure is somehow feeding algorithms or being surfaced in a way beyond the summative result of that process creates deep concerns. And if we extend that to the learner record, I think there is no question that what you record has consequences. What you record has consequences. It will create feedback loops. The CLR project that ACRO has helped fund with Lumina is tracking some of that. I mean, an innocuous feedback loop is when you let freshmen know that they can graduate with something like Elon's co-curricular transcript, do you see higher participation rates in clubs and activities, because now they can make that connection between those experiences and what their record could look like on the other side. I would say that's a relatively positive. Here's the empty palette and it's for you to paint. And by the way, here's what a completed picture could look like and why it's an advantage to do that. But to your point, in a world of haves and have-nots, you could very quickly see inequality replicated because there are people who are more sophisticated, who have parents, who have others that know how to take advantage of that. We see that in the undergraduate admissions context in the US, where you have some high school students who, starting in their freshman year of high school, are going through summer programs and have access to all sorts of experiences, all with an eye to get into an Ivy League institution, whereas others don't. So I think it's an important question for institutions. I sat, not to over answer the question, I apologize, but I feel very strongly about this. I sat in a public university session where they debated whether if you're working at Starbucks while you're enrolled at the institution, is that kind of work experience something that gets reflected in a comprehensive learner record? It's not really part of your academic program. But then, of course, there are a lot of students who work their way through college, may not be able to participate in those other activities. And so their work experience speaks to grit and speaks to what they were doing during that time, again, in a world potentially of inferences if your co-curricular transcript is less populated than others. So hopefully I've spoken to the context or the nuances or the texture of what you're raising, but it's one we're, deeply concerned, and I don't want to just hide behind the idea that we're a tool vendor. We want to be thoughtful about this and help illuminate some of the policy questions that have to be addressed.
That's a really nice answer. Thank you for that.
I mean, that chimes really strongly with some of the debates in the UK about how to, in a very diverse higher education sector, how to ensure that we give something through this initiative to all of our students, or as many as we can. And clearly, whether paid employment fits into an academically verified document, or document verified by an institution, I should say, is an important issue. And we're almost out of time, but having had that bit of the discussion, Katrina's just gone, so she's obviously sensing what I was going to ask. Jane, I don't know whether you're still with us, and you might be able to just respond to this, because Jane and Katrina work for the Open University in the UK, and that's a very different context in the sense that students are distance learners, they have multiple roles, they're part-time, they study around the edge of all their other roles, and that also creates some challenges for what you represent in the kind of document we're talking about. If it goes silent now, I know Jane hasn't, I'm not sure, I'll actually ask the question, but Jane, do you want to say anything? Jane's unable to talk. Can you maybe write something in chat then? Okay, well, we'll go for Milo while we Jane, if you want to add anything in chat, that would be fine. Milo's just got another question from the Gradintel perspective, which is one of our vendors here in the UK, and that's around the formative value of records in motivational terms for students. And I might add in that in terms of focusing student recognition as well of their achievements, which touches on your point, Matt, about students don't always recognise the capacities and the qualities and the capabilities that they have, particularly if they're being asked to write it into a competency framework they're unfamiliar with. So I don't know whether that the comment from Milo kind of resonates with yourself.
Oh, it absolutely does. And again, I think the way where these questions are going, the next webinar really will address them nicely, and Rodney does an excellent job of that. And I think he would say exactly that it does motivate and encourage and reinforce the value. My point, which I guess is an even broader point from a sociological perspective, that the more that we link the charter of the university to the labor market, and the more that becomes an iron linkage, that feeds back on degree major choice, on course selection choice, it feeds back on records then feed back on choice of co-curricular activities. It's easy to be a critic here, and I don't want to present too much of a dystopian future, but you can imagine a continued tightening away from one view of what higher education is about to a very different view. And we want to be thoughtful about that. And part of that is illuminating the value of being in the a cappella group, illuminating the value of these other experiences. But there's a lot of positive as well. I don't want to, suggest otherwise.
Thanks very much, Matt. James, we're effectively out of time, but I just want to note Jane's point about the Open University. The co-curricular, in a sense, is a different context if you're a part-time distance learner, and the question then is, I guess, is where the boundaries of the digital record actually lie in terms of what's included, what's not included. A, because the institution wants to put its name to it, but also because the student might not want it included. We've had some debates in the UK about identifying information about students from the clubs and societies they belong to in terms of co-curricular. So if you're a member of the Marxist Revolutionary Club, that might not play marvelously well with some blue chip employers.
Sure.
So there's an issue it's about audience again, and whether some aspects of the data that are in the data set you can choose not to display to certain audiences, I guess. Or in the case of the OU, you choose not to provide it for that record, or it's not included in that record because of the nature of the student experience. Okay, I'm mindful of time. We're just running out of time. I just want to say thank you to Matt and Jimmy for an absolutely tremendous hour. That was brilliant. I can't wait for the next webinar, actually, and that's on the 21st of May. So get your tickets now, colleagues. You will get some information about it if you haven't had it already, and we'll be digging in with the help of Rod Parks as well as Matt to some of these aspects in a bit more detail. And it's both reassuring and fascinating to recognise that actually a lot of the discussions we're having that are taking place on different continents are very, very familiar discussions to both groups, really. So Matt, thank you so much. Colleagues, thank you for joining us. Jimmy also, that was really interesting stuff, and student surveys. We have got something to share from the UK, which I'll try and get out of the Higher Education Academy as was, around student reactions to what they're getting. But it's, from memory, it echoes a lot of what you found. So that's good. That is good too. Sorry.
And thank you, Rob, for moderating so well.
Yeah, you're most welcome, Steve, and thank you, colleagues, for. I love the way everybody's been fantastically silent. This system where nobody's allowed to use their microphones is really good. Okay, thank you, everyone. And from our point of view, good evening. I guess for Matt, maybe Jimmy's point of view, the day is just beginning in terms of work. Thank you, Matt. We'll be speaking again in a couple of weeks.
Looking forward to it. Have a great day.
And thank you. Send us your slides if you haven't done, and we'll link them to the recording.
Bye all.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
Bye now.